I don't want to make too many apologies for talking a lot about wool on Sarah's country, because it is no joke that we are in the lowest prices for strong wool that has ever been in this country, and it's getting to crunch time. So, of course, the pulpit section in Farmers Weekly is always a fantastic read. And, of course, if you've got an opinion on anything, make sure you send it into the Farmers Weekly editor, Brian. The opinion piece this week in the op-ed was written by AgResearch's Dr. Trevor Stuthridge, and research team leader Dr. Stewart Collie is also going to join us shortly. But the trials and the tribulations of the wool industry have been very well aired. But in particular around wool research, it's not touched on so much. So joining us now is both Dr. Trevor and Dr. Stewart. Good evening, gentlemen. We were discussing there in the break around the gender of winter and of seasons. You have some thoughts?
Well, traditionally it's known as Old Man Winter, so I think we can assume the gender is male.
Thank you. It's a very scientific approach.
Very scientific answer.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Now, Trevor, what drove you to put pen to paper and form an opinion in public around what is going on behind closed doors with wool research, and why strong wool growers shouldn't give up?
I think because we're conscious of the change in the sector and how they are struggling, but the struggle is coinciding with a real driver towards natural fibres and new opportunities for innovative biomaterials. So we wanted to make sure that the industry understood that there's still lots of upside in the sector around appropriate production of wool in the right way, and then what we can use it for. And this comes at a time when I think the consumers around the world are looking for this sort of product. So not time to give up yet. In fact, it's perhaps the time to focus more deeply on how we can add more value to it and really make it a more fulfilling part of the sector overall.
Years. Can you just give us an overview of some of the exciting projects that you are working on that you can publicly talk about?
Look, so we cover the entire agricultural sector. In the wool area, I'll certainly pass on to Stewart, who's a world expert in the production of wool products. I guess on the farm, we've been doing a lot of work, as you know, with the sector around improving wool breeding, looking at other ways to handle the wool and improve resistance to things like fly strike and so forth. So we make the point in the article, there's still plenty of work to do on farm as well. But I'll ask Stewart to give you some background on his many years of work of doing something with wool, which I think is really exciting, and as I say, comes at a time of great opportunity.
Yeah, Stuart, let's lighten about what's happening within the shed and on farm.
Yes, well, I can't say too much about the on-farm aspect of research that's going on. My expertise is more in stuff that's happening in the post-farm gate space. And I guess the key focus that we have, well, there's probably two focuses to what we have at the moment, one of which is research that better understands and demonstrates the beneficial attributes of wool so that it can be marketed to those consumers that Trevor's talked about who are looking for natural products, high-performing natural products. And that's often focused on the well-being aspects of wool, but also the environmental and sustainability aspects. So we do research that relates to things like biodegradation behavior of wool compared to synthetics, and a lot of concern there is around microfiber or microplastic pollution that comes from synthetic materials. And then there's an important aspect of research that has a focus on making new materials or new types of products, high-value products out of wool. And some of that involves using the wool as its natural fibre form, but some of it also involves pulling it apart and reconstituting it in ways that create more value. So those are probably the main focus areas for the wool research that we've done over the last few years as a way of trying to address the concerns that exist for the wool industry and creating more demand for wool.
What I would say, Sarah, is that on farm there's still plenty of opportunity for breeding finer, more expensive wool, higher performing, and also some of the costs of wool handling. I think we can look at ways to reduce those. So we spend an awful lot of cost on the farm baling the wool and processing it on farm in the bale form. If we could bulk handle it and transport it in a bulk form, that would certainly reduce the cost of wool production on the farm as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I've had some conversations with a lot of bright minds around Lincoln here and questioning things like, why do we have a huge capital outlay for twice a year or sometimes once a year? And to have people come in and question what we've done for 100 years. I mean, what would that ideal look like in terms of changing to harvest of our wool and to other ways that have new products and things like that?
Well, I think if we have higher value in the final product in terms of using it for advanced insulation, advanced clothing systems, as Stewart is doing, then some of those costs can be passed on down into the market. But I think efficiency on farm around cycles of shearing, cycles of basically the way we handle, as I said, in terms of cost of putting it together into bales and so forth. I think there's lots of opportunities around, sheep that don't have wool that we don't need. So breeding sheep that don't have wool in parts of the body that aren't worth shearing because of the quality or the contamination of the wool. There's a lot of opportunity there, I think, to be more sophisticated in the way we generate the wool.
I think one thing I was going to add to that is that I guess it's important to produce fibre that is optimized for the end uses that we require it for. So when we make new products that have high value, we're often putting a higher specification on the wool than is perhaps normally the case. So producing wool fibre of a type that is optimized for that purpose is a good way of thinking about how you might link the on-farm fibre production side of things with the post-farm gate fibre processing and product development.
So say, for instance, the product of keratin going into nutraceuticals and healthcare and cosmetics, how would something like that be handled in a very different way on farm, but also too from a feed management perspective, because that's got a lot to do with the fibre makeup?
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how in that situation you would manipulate things, but I could imagine ways in which you would. You could potentially, you'd be changing from a situation where your focus would be on the structural and physical attributes of the fibre to more of a focus on the protein that makes up the fibre. So you would be wanting to get a large quantity of that material. You wouldn't necessarily be so concerned about the diameter or other attributes of it. You'd be interested in getting a good quality of keratin in high quantity in the most efficient way possible.
And that's because you're going to deconstruct it further down the system. So you don't need to be so worried about sorting it on farm, because there's a process downstream that's going to basically pull it apart into much smaller pieces than you would normally do. So that deconstruction, taking that complexity of a wool fibre and retaining that complexity is what we want to do. But also taking it from just saying it's this long, thin thing to how we can actually break it into smaller components and introduce it into cosmetics or into healthcare products is a real opportunity. And many of the ingredients in those products at the moment are not sustainable. They are made from synthetic polymers and so forth. And so the wool is a natural replacement for that, has a big market appeal, but also just the qualities that wool introduces into those sort of products, the skincare properties that wool has. As a natural protein, the skin doesn't mind natural proteins. They're being next to it, and so it behaves in a different way, say, from putting various bioplastics or polymers into a system.
And in your pulpit piece in Farmers Weekly, Trevor, your science impact leader Andy Cooper has been a part of this wool industry project action group. We're going to be joined by Rob Hewitt, who's taking the chair role of the Strong Wool Action Group. Now, one of the big things, part of that, is funding and the structure around, or creating effectively a new structure pipeline around that. How do you believe that would be a most beneficial system?
Well, I think the reason we all need the funding is in many ways at the moment we have a challenge around that low value material, and we don't know what we don't know about what to do with it. So we need to explore the properties of the material, the efficiencies across the value chain, and then how we can align that to the new consumer drivers that are out there. from our perspective with that pulpit piece, it's too early to give up on wool. There is actually, if anything, the alignment of the international markets for these type of products is just beginning. There's just an acceptance that this is what the sophisticated consumer wants to have, but they will not pick up on that unless these products have been developed and de-risked and scaled up to a point where they can actually appreciate them and use them. So this sort of funding stream we think is really important to test the opportunities for wool beyond its traditional uses, and then scale it up to a point where we can start to impact the local sector in terms of changing the way we behave in terms of harvesting the wool and also how we process it downstream. And of course, in New Zealand, the greatest opportunity is ideally to recover as much of that value onshore as we can. So processing it to the point where it can go offshore to L'Oreal or Neutrogena and so forth is great, but we want to keep the value onshore as far as we can in terms of the processing of that material.
Stuart, what does that look like from what projects you've been working on?
Yeah, I think absolutely that's the case. The research that we do is there to demonstrate the attributes of wool in these applications. We find clever ways of doing that. We increase our understanding of the material, which helps us be able to deliver a product to those consumers. And I think a lot of what we like to do is that research that engages with the local industry, the New Zealand onshore processors, companies that exist. There's a number of them now that are doing very clever things with wool in New Zealand. They're looking to add value to the fibre in New Zealand. Those are the ones that are the most exciting from a research perspective.
And if we can create that value onshore, we can send some of it back to the wool producers themselves. So at the moment, they are very much in a commodity space and perhaps don't get the return that they require. So more add value onshore allows us to return it back down the value chain, back to the original farmers themselves, and support them in driving that innovation from their side as well.
And Trevor, just to close, research is only research unless it's commercialised. And I'm really looking forward to being joined by Brooke Marshall on tomorrow night's show from AgResearch, commercialisation manager who's a finalist in the KiwiNet Awards. But am I fair to say AgResearch is seriously leaning into commercialising science, and this is a big part of your future?
Absolutely. So science without uptake is interesting but not useful. So really we're focusing more on our new science strategy around the uptake and application of the science. And it's about making sure, therefore, we're closely aligned with the consumers and the producers right from the very beginning of our thinking, all the way through to the commercialising stage that Brooke's so good at managing on our behalf. So yeah, if we can't align to the needs of the end users, then we're really in the realm of doing interesting stuff for ourselves. So AgResearch's key role, I think, as a CRI for the agricultural sector is to make sure we align to consumer needs and to the farming sector, take them on that journey, de-risk it for them, and show them the future that they can have.
What a great way to end. Thank you so much, Research Director at AgResearch, Dr. Trevor Stuthridge, and Research Team Leader, Dr. Stewart Collie. Thank you so much for your time. This is Sarah's Country.